France are so fun to watch. About 2 years ago now, I made a video on how the French handled themselves on the international stage and how it was very unorthodox, to say the least. But as a neutral, I find it very entertaining to watch, despite them underachieving compared to what I believe they were capable of. But now, we arrive at a place where it is just glorious, and I can't wait to delve deeper into it. Let's discuss. So, to provide some much needed context to what we are seeing before us, let's have a little refresher of French rugby from 2018 to the 2019 World Cup. Jacques Brunel's era as French coach is interesting to look back on in hindsight, as if you look at his record as French coach, it's really unpleasant viewing if you're a French fan. With only 3 wins in 2018, 2 of them coming in games that they were probably expected to win, those games being Italy and Argentina at home, and then a victory against the disastrous England 2018 team, who as we now know were in desperate need of refreshing. So then after you take those 3 victories out of it, it's just loss after loss, a really disappointing Six Nations, followed by a 3-0 series loss in New Zealand where they didn't even really threaten the All Blacks, and finally a disappointing autumn where they narrowly lose to a pre-Razzie Erasmus Springbok team and cap off their year with a home loss against Fiji. It was bleak times for one of the biggest rugby nations in the world, and in 2019 things didn't really let up for the French team when the Six Nations came around, with an opening game loss to Wales followed by their record-breaking defeat against England 44-8. But this 2019 period is what actually gives me conflicted thoughts on Brunel's time as France's main man, because despite the results during this time, he did blood in crucial young players that will become very, very important to France's transformation later on. Players like Untemak, Aldrit, Demba-Bamba, Ramos, as well as influential mainstays now like Paul Willemse. Now, I don't know how much credit you can give to Brunel for talent identification with this France team, because if you look at the players I mentioned, the talent level could be considered a no-brainer to bring the players into the squad. But then I look at other international teams and the politics of rugby can often get in the way of players getting their chance on the international stage. Which, speaking of rugby politics, one of the worst kept secrets about the French team at the time was the fact that a lot of the senior players in the squad had a lot of power and basically ran things. Players like Para, Bastareaud, Picamoles were the main ones that were talked about a lot, with Para publicly criticising the coach of the team after their loss against England in the 2019 Six Nations. From what I can infer, the environment that Brunel was trying to build success in wasn't really one that was receptive to any kind of authority, despite the extremely high levels of player quality in the squad. By the time the Rugby World Cup came around, the squad that they actually selected had omitted a lot of the mainstay experienced faces. Players like Para and Bastareaud were left at home, and instead they opted for a more youthful approach to the tournament. And along with that, there was a very influential man who joined the French staff as the vice head coach, and was scheduled to take over in 2020. That man, of course, being the one and only Fabien Galthié. Now, we don't know how much of an influence he had on the squad selections for the World Cup, but from what we know about him, I doubt he would have been keen to work with Bastareaud and Para, especially considering their previous. God, there's a lot of politics in rugby, innit? Jeez. Anyway, the French actually had a pretty decent Rugby World Cup in my opinion. Playing a lot of nice stuff with their new younger team, we saw the beginnings of their new high-tempo style of attack, with Antoine Dupont really finding his feet at the international level. And if not for basically a complete mental meltdown from one of the second rows during the quarterfinal against Wales, they probably would have won that game, and who knows what would have happened in the semi. It was a disappointment for the French nation, of course, but to be honest, considering where they came from, I think a quarterfinal exit is okay. As an England fan, I know firsthand sometimes you don't even get that far. And that led us into 2020 and the Fabien Galthié era. Now, Fabien Galthié is one of the most fascinating men in rugby, and maybe just in general. There are multiple accounts for players who've worked under him talking about him being abusive to players, pulling them by their ears, calling them fat little piggies, I'm not joking, as well as him having a reputation for being quote-unquote a maverick, or someone who isn't really interested in being a part of any sort of community, team or group. Which, considering his bubble break in 2021 during the Six Nations to watch his son play and contracting COVID in the process, those perceptions might not be unfounded. Great dad move though. Respect. If you look back, it was even reported that Bernard Laporte didn't even want to hire him. He was more keen on following the Northern Hemisphere trend of getting a foreign coach in to sort the national team out, but he was outvoted by his colleagues. But despite all of this controversy surrounding him, even those who critique him always talk about him being a genius level coach, especially on the attacking side of the game, which is probably why he gets away with being the way he is. Sports are a results-based business, and he's shown that he's clearly the best man for the job. I do believe that this intense style of coaching is suited to the international game as well. So much of it is about being emotionally aroused and present in short bursts for the players. It's why I believe Eddie Jones probably wouldn't work as a club level coach, and why I believe that Jose Mourinho is struggling with club management at the moment. That kind of hammering, grinding style of management can get grating if it's every day, but in short international windows, it's perfect, and perfect for him and people who use a similar style. like his newly appointed defence coach Sean Edwards, who brought so much success to the Wales team, and he was brought in to bring some steel to the French defence, which had been basically missing since 2020 when they last won the Grand Slam. The appointment of these two men was a massive turning point for the French team, as before this point, the coaching of the French team had always been a point of debate for pundits and rugby people all around the world, as you'd question yourself thinking, are they the problem? Are they doing their best? Is it the players' fault? But now it's confirmed, world-class talent behind the scenes, black and white, no excuses. It was time to see if the players could deliver. And speaking of the players, now that Galtier was in charge, his first major decision would be around his squad and how he wanted to proceed building to France's home World Cup in 2023. Now, I've spoken about the talent in French rugby in both this video and the previous one, but something that I've realised in the time between the two is how good the player quality in the top 14 has become. It's actually incredible the amount of talent that's in the league currently, with this year's Champions Cup having 5 French quarterfinalists, then 3 French semi-finalists, and then an all-French final involving La Rochelle and Toulouse. And you could maybe argue that the league's always had high levels of players with constant big money signings from all around the world. But I think the type of signings that the teams are making has changed ever so slightly over the last few years. And it's not players coming to the end of their prime and wanting to play in a slower league. It's now players in their prime coming in, going to war week in, week out. And I believe that it's this slight change and evolution in recruitment that has meant that the league's style has actually changed quite a bit. You obviously still have your trademark humongous forward packs, but the game is now played at a much higher tempo, especially when you compare it to previous years. In my opinion, this evolution of the game in France started happening around 2018, and I believe this has been a perfect combination and storm for the emergence of France's amazing young talent coming through the ranks. With the French under-20 side winning back-to-back under-20 World Cups in 2018 and 19, with 9 players from those winning teams now being capped at the senior French level, including likes of Demba Bamba, Louis Carbonel, Romain Ntamack, Arthur Vincent, Cameron Woki and Mathieu Jalibert. Then you have all the uncapped players who have been brought into the squads for experience. Some journalists have called it a golden generation for the French youth setup, and I'm inclined to agree, especially because a lot of these young players aren't just good, they're so elite that they've become dominant, especially the 2 young halfbacks in Toulouse, Dupont and Ntamack, who have become European and domestic champions in the same season. These 2 players, in my opinion, are the jewels in the crown of French rugby and their future. Both playing such influential positions and being genuinely top 5 in the world, Dupont maybe even being number 1, and both still being so young. It's genuinely lightning in the bottle, and if they can stay healthy, the sky is the limit. And we saw that when the 2020 Six Nations started and Galtier's era began, with them being the standout team of the tournament, being joint on points with the eventual winners England, who they beat in the first round of the tournament really convincingly, and Antoine Dupont being player of the Six Nations. It was a statement of a campaign from the French, and the statement was basically, they're back. Since then, COVID has been a disruption to all teams, which has meant that we've had a lot of chopping and changing with the French team's personnel. But through this, we have seen the immense depth of the French squad, with players like Jalibert and Carbonel and Woki all stepping up and being genuinely outstanding. And that's just naming a few. Then this summer tour we had the series against Australia, where without most of their big guns, they basically won the series. In the first test, they did something unfathomable and threw the game away in the last second, which is kind of what they did against Scotland as well. Anyway, they won the second test, and in the third test, Australia won a well-fought game. But my point is, basically, no matter what the personnel is, this team can play, and they're a proper threat. And with all these factors combining, this French team is now my favourite international team to watch, playing high-tempo attacking stuff, and they're a great advert for the game. I haven't even got to mention all the players that I love watching in the team, like Vakatawa, Thomas and Fiku, who have all come through France's dark era and now become the outstanding international players that we all wanted them to be. And long may it continue. Flair, pace, power, it's all there in the French team now. And you could say, it's a beautiful way to play. Signed NGJ.